What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Fantasy Flex podcast. I am your host, Chris Raybon. I'm here with one of the top fantasy rankers in the game, and Sean Koerner. And for today, I'm real excited because we got a very, very special guest. We're going to be talking all about quarterbacks, and who better to do it than the man who has pretty much defined the way we draft quarterbacks for more than a decade now. Also the man who is the reason that I'm even sitting here. Like, you guys wouldn't be listening to me if it wasn't for this man. So I am proud to welcome Mr. JJ Zachariason to the show. What's up, JJ?
I mean, look, man. Well, first off, it's good to be here. It's great to be here. But you would have been out there. People would have discovered you if not for you starting a number fire and stuff. I feel very blessed and lucky that you just happened to stumble upon Number Fire and write me that scathing review of an article that someone had written on Number Fire way back in the day that ended up, basically Raybon came at me and was like, I don't agree with this article. Here's why. And my response to him was, hey, why don't you come write for us instead of, just like getting upset about these articles that are on this website. And then here he is today. So I'm very, very happy for you, man.
I appreciate it. And yeah, it was a crazy situation because I was reading your book at the time. It was the only email I've ever sent like that, to a site. So it was, chance, it happens, but glad to be here with you guys. And for all you out there, we're going to be talking late round quarterbacks. Just want to mention our contest winner for the episode. And if you guys leave a review on Apple, we pick the best one each week and we give you a year of Action Pro. And this week's winner is Matt H-Man. And I got to read this full interview because I thought it was hilarious. He goes, Fantasy Flex is an outlier. I tried to manually adjust this rating to a 5.5, but I still couldn't quite get there. Still, 5.0 isn't bad and puts the Fantasy Flex squarely in the top 10 with upside from there in the non-PPR. So
what a fantastic review.
Yeah. Like, if you listen to the show, that's essentially my dilemma with Nick Chubb's yards per carry every year.
JJ, Raybon was projecting Nick Chubb for like 4.9 yards per rush last year. I said, I understand the logic behind it, but for him specifically, you just have to manually make it 5.5 and move on with life. It's just
100%
much better to do it.
You cannot use logic with Nick Chubb.
You're right. It was like the Titans red zone offense with Arthur Smith a couple years ago. It was like you just have to bump everything up.
Right.
But so hit up podcast at actionnetwork.com to claim your year of Action Network Pro. Matt H-Man, thank you for the review. And let's jump right into this. And JJ, the question I'm going to start out with is, you're famous for the late round quarterback strategy. I'm sure many of our listeners are familiar, but if they aren't, can you just kind of break that down and kind of put it in the context of 2022? Because you've been doing this for over a decade now.
Yeah. Thanks for calling me out for being old. I appreciate it. So, back in 2012 was when I published the late round quarterback ebook. And at that time, it's hard to believe, but 5 quarterbacks had ADPs in the first 2 rounds of season long drafts. And it was really just a response of like that near lockout season that happened in 2011, where like quarterback numbers were ballooned a little bit. We saw it even a little bit, recently with like the COVID season and such, where at the beginning of the front half of that season, we saw more scoring and such. I think a lot of people see those instances and they're like, they assume that defenses are going to, or, offenses won't be in sync, but offenses dictate games. And that's why we see, what we see from a scoring standpoint. And so in 2012, everyone was like, I got to get a quarterback early. I got to get Matthew Stafford in the back half of the first round and Cam Newton in the first round and all this kind of stuff. But really, the quarterback's value in season long leagues, it doesn't change that dramatically year over year because you're only starting one of them in your typical season long league. And not only that, because you're starting only one of them, you can generally get pretty viable options later in your draft. And, whenever I published that ebook, that really meant like getting like the 12th quarterback in like the 8th round. But that just sort of like evolved through the years where, like basically in like 2015 and 2016, there was no correlation basically between where you're drafting these quarterbacks in like the top 18 or so, and basically how they finished on a points per game basis. 2015 in particular, the R squared between top 18 quarterbacks by ADP and points per game was literally 0. I mean, it was completely irrelevant. And so we saw that like kind of bounce back and forth throughout the 2015 to 2018 range. And then, what we're seeing now these last couple of seasons is the market is catching up and realizing that quarterback mobility is so important. And what that's done is that, if you look at top 18 quarterbacks by ADP and look at their points per game and find the correlation, you go from, back, like I said, in 2015, 2018, a non-existent correlation between those two to the last couple of seasons, it's been 55%. I mean, it's been actually fairly strong. And so where we're at now with the late round quarterback strategy is, yes, it's viable. But I think a lot of people assume that a guy like Josh Allen or Kyler Murray, whoever, that they're giving you this huge point advantage, but it's not so much the point advantage that they're giving you, it's the predictability that they're giving you. Whereas before we didn't have that predictability. Like we would draft a guy in the 4th round or something like that by ADP, and he would finish as the QB 13. And that's just the way that things went. But now we have the stability at the quarterback position, which, I think it'll run out eventually, but what it's doing is, the top 12 quarterbacks are generally the top 12 quarterbacks that you should be targeting. There's going to be guys who slip through the cracks. Of course, it's not going to be perfect, but that's going to force you to draft quarterbacks a little bit earlier. So, I wrote about this a couple of years ago when this was starting to happen with the quarterback mobility stuff. And I joked that I would become more of a middle round quarterback instead of the late round quarterback. And I think we've seen it come to fruition, but I do think, and I want to stress that, like, eventually we're going to have enough dual threat quarterbacks and the ability for these guys to have, 12 to 15 different guys. We might even be there this year, 12 to 15 different guys where we feel very, very good about their ability to be a top 3 or top 4 true difference maker at the quarterback position. But, overall, it's really that, like, what we've seen the last couple of seasons, not only are those high end guys just performing well, but there's a really, really big drop off, like after that QB 12 spot. And that's just forcing, ADP to get higher. And I actually agree with that logic and why quarterbacks are being drafted earlier.
And so a follow-up to that then is because we're going to really kind of break down some of these, late round guys and guys that you can find outside the top 12. But, our listeners have heard Sean and I talk about guys in that 9 to 12 range, guys like Brady, Wilson, Stafford, and Rodgers. Where are you on those 4 guys in particular, just in terms of, are you extremely high on any or low on any of those guys? Or are those guys you're targeting kind of in that tier, just all around?
Yeah, like I said, last couple of years, this range has been really, really profitable. I mean, we had like Josh Allen a couple of years ago. We've had Aaron Rodgers in this range. We've had Tom Brady in this range. So it's been a profitable range overall. It depends on your ADP source, of course, but of the guys that you mentioned, I think that my favorite of that group is Russ. Tampa Bay loses some weapons. They're almost definitely going to have some regression in the passing department. They're just not going to throw as many times as they did last year, maybe even the year before that. Not only because of the weapons, but the coaching change as well. The Rams last season scored 80% of their touchdowns through the air, which is another metric that tends to regress year over year. Matthew Stafford had his highest touchdown rate of his career, which, of course he had great weapons, and I'm not downplaying that whatsoever, but it's just these numbers generally do regress year over year. Stafford himself was just throwing the ball at an insane rate at the goal line. He was second in the NFL in goal line attempts. So, those numbers are just very difficult to sustain, year after season after season. Aaron Rodgers loses Devontae Adams. I know that his splits have been fine without Adams, but there is still at least some concern when you lose the best wide receiver in the game. And so it really comes down to Russ. You get a new system. He's not handcuffed by Pete Carroll anymore. Hopefully, you don't get that from this coaching staff. Amazing weapons there. And, there's the upside of what if we see him escape the pocket a little bit more than what he's done over the last few seasons. So I think of that group, not only is Russ like he's easy to stack too. I mean, there's these like tertiary players that you can get later with him as well. But of that group, I think that he's the one who has the most upside.
Yeah, I think Russ is kind of the most interesting for me for redraft. I do like Aaron Rodgers in best ball, just because he's so cheap to stack now with his pass catchers now that you have no Adams. Sean, real quick, what about you? Out of Brady, Wilson, Stafford, Rodgers, who's your favorite?
You left off my favorite, which is Jalen Hurts just above him. But if he's off the board, I always say Tom Brady's a nice fallback option, or I go JJ's plan and I punt QB completely, or, I get Trey Lance later on. But just one thing to point out, just when it comes to in-season streaming, I'm typically able to get generate a QB 8 just from streaming alone. So that's one way to go about it. And that's also kind of why I like 2 QB super flex leagues, because it makes quarterback valuable, as it should be. So in like a 2 QB league, yeah, I'm targeting Brady. And like you said, Rodgers, he's cheap to stack with those cheap receivers. So I do like him in best ball as well.
You mentioned Trey Lance, so let's jump right into the Konami codes, as we like to call them. JJ, I really want to get your opinion on Trey Lance because, ever since I've kind of, followed your stuff and he seems to kind of be that, like, he fits the mold perfectly of that original late round quarterback that you kind of pointed out back in 2012, where, he's outside the top 12. We're kind of sleeping on him a little bit. He's got this rushing ability. So JJ, where are you on Trey Lance? Is he going too low at QB 14 in Fantasy Pros ADP?
Yeah, I think that's way too low. I think he's a top 10 quarterback fairly easily too. I know, look, a lot of people, I've seen the arguments, they're questioning his arm. They're questioning his ability there. And my retort back is always, okay, well, look at Jalen Hurts last year, right? Look at Jalen Hurts the last 2 years since he entered the league. It doesn't matter, right? It's not that big of a deal. Even if Trey Lance is not this machine with his arm, he can still walk into a top 7, top 8 season at quarterback, if not more, if he gets some of that rushing touchdown fortune, which Jalen Hurts got a little bit last year. Last season we saw that glimpse from Trey Lance where he got the 2 starts. He ran the ball 24 times in those 2 games, which is a rushing attempt per game average. That's a rush attempt per game average is better than what we've seen from Lamar Jackson throughout his career. He scored 14.6 and 19.1 points in those 2 games. But if you recall, everyone probably remembers this, but he was an inch away from scoring that rushing touchdown in that game. I think it was against Arizona. And so those numbers could have looked even better. And it's not like he was this superior passer in those contests. It's just that scoring really favors mobile quarterbacks. It favors these rushing quarterbacks. And so not only that, but this is a system, the San Francisco system, where Jimmy Garoppolo was second in the NFL last year in yards per attempt. And Jimmy Garoppolo currently can't even find a job in the NFL. Maybe it has to do with the injury, but of course, maybe it has to do with the injury, but at the same time, what does that say? It says that the system is likely pretty good. It's a system that's really predicated on creating yards after the catch, right? And they draft guys like Brandon Ayuk who can do that really well. Obviously, Debo's probably the best in the NFL at that. George Kittle is unbelievable with the ball in his hands. And so he's got this system. He's got these weapons. He can run the ball, and they're going to utilize him on the ground like that. Like you said, Raybon, he's like the quintessential late round quarterback. I honestly think that you could be drafting him comfortably over even like a Tom Brady. I think he's more in like the Joe Burrow range from a redraft standpoint. I'd be fine with taking him over Dak. I just think that it's logical to. We've seen this year after year after year with these guys, and this just feels so much like how a lot of us felt about Lamar Jackson during his first full season as starter. It just seems, I don't think Trey Lance is going to be nearly as prolific as a rusher as Lamar Jackson is. And obviously that's that MVP season that Lamar had. He was unbelievable as a passer, which he hasn't even been able to replicate since. But again, Trey Lance has the system. He has the weapons. I don't know why you wouldn't just go hard for Trey Lance, especially at a price tag where he's a QB2.
Yeah. I'll weigh in, but Sean, what do you, I agree with JJ on this, but where are you on Trey?
Yeah, obviously I loved him last year. I was probably a year too early on him, but you gotta love the blend of rushing ability and arm talent, especially when you get him outside of the QB1 range. QB 14 is criminal. The only reason I'm cautiously all in is because they still have Jimmy G. Who knows what's going to happen if they can't get rid of him? That's going to suck. But Kyle Shanahan reiterated today that Trey Lance will be their starting quarterback. So things like that, made me feel comfortable targeting him here. But he also has those weapons. JJ mentioned them, but Debo Samuel, George Kittle, those are elite talents. Brandon Ayuk is pretty solid for your number 3 target. So I love the upside you get here. Very little risk taking him in this range. So yeah, I'm cautiously all in on Lance right here.
I don't even think we need caution anymore. Kyle Shanahan's out here talking about Jimmy G in the past tense. This man brought him to the Super Bowl and is still on a roster. And he's like, nice to know you, bro. I think it's a wrap. We've seen Kyle Shanahan do this with Nick Mullins and CJ Beathard, or I don't even know how to pronounce his name. There's a stat at one point where it was like, you look at the top 20 quarterbacks over the last few years in in net yard average adjusted net yards per attempt. And like there's 3 Niner quarterbacks on that list heading into last year, I think it was. So, this system is amazing. You guys mentioned it. The weapons are great. And he's got that rushing ability. And the more he struggles as a passer, the more they're going to run with him. He's anti-fragile. Like this is the guy. This is why you look at like that QB 9 to 12 range and you're like, Tom Brady, okay. Like Aaron Rodgers, like those are great quarterbacks, but they don't run as much, save for Russ. And I just think as long as the ADP is giving me Trey Lance, when I could be the last person in a one QB league to draft my QB and I could get Trey Lance, that's a cheat code right there.
I think the other thing too is that people are concerned a lot with players like this for their floor. Like they're worried that they're not going to get any sort of production from these guys because, they might be bad, right? Like Trey Lance could be a bad quarterback. We have no idea, but the rushing component actually gives these guys a floor. And what provides the ceiling is if they are a truly, dominant or good passer, which is then we get those unicorn seasons like we did with Lamar Jackson during his second year. So that's always a possibility with Trey Lance. I mean, we've seen it historically. We know the system's there. That's why he's just a slam dunk pick.
All right, let's move on to the second guy in this kind of Konami code tier. And I don't think slam dunk is the right word for this guy, but I am kind of warming up to him for the exact reasons that you kind of talk about, JJ. It's like, he does have the rushing ability, but it's like he doesn't have the supporting cast around him that Lance does or the coaching staff or whatnot. So Justin Fields, that's who I'm talking about. JJ, like, where are you on Fields entering year 2?
Yeah, I mean, from a fantasy perspective, he's like diet Trey Lance, right? Like you're basically hoping to score points in a very, very similar fashion. I'm in on Fields though at his price right now. I think that he should be more in like the QB 14-ish range, maybe even like QB 13. But he's being drafted at QB 17. Over his final 4 games that he completed last year, which is when they had like the coordinator shifts and the play calling shifts and such. He was putting up low end QB1 numbers. He was averaging 8.5 rush attempts per game. He was adding almost 8 points per game on the ground alone during that time. I think that we can continue to see that this year. I just don't think that he has the same type of upside as Trey Lance. We haven't seen the system really in place with Justin Fields, obviously, but it's really, really hard to back sort of like an organization too, but like the weapons in general. I mean, Byron Pringle being the 2, Cole Kmet hopefully takes a step forward, and Darnell Mooney's great. But there's not a lot of depth there at wide receiver. And you have to question just an organization from a building perspective when they draft a guy like Velus Jones, who's a 25-year-old rookie wide receiver. You just have to question, do they know what they're doing? And I don't know if I have the answer to that. So there's a little bit, I'm a little bit afraid from that perspective as well. But I do think, again, like, don't worry about the floor necessarily. You shouldn't really worry about floor for quarterbacks in single quarterback leagues to begin with, for the most part, because like Sean alluded to, you can stream pretty reliably. It's been a little bit more difficult the last couple of years, but it's still, you can still get that like QB8, QB9. But Fields will at least, should have the ability to get there with his rushing, as long as that maintains from the second portion of last season. But if he progresses as a passer, then we could see him being in that like mid-range QB1 area. Whereas I think Trey Lance from a ceiling perspective has like top 2 or 3 quarterback in his range of outcomes.
Yeah. Like looking at ADP, it almost seems like Trey Lance should be where Jalen Hurts is. And then Justin Fields should be where Trey Lance is. Like everyone, like these mobile quarterbacks are like a tier 2 low.
Hey, like where should Jalen Hurts be then?
Like 2.
You want okay. Agreed.
But like you get what I'm saying, though, right? But yeah. So Sean, because we've talked about this, like it's tough to like anything around Fields. Like even with the coaching staff, like this is an unproven coaching staff. Like JJ said, I do like Darnell Mooney. I think he's criminally underrated. I think he's a very good receiver, but they really don't have anything else on the offensive line. The receiving room, I mean, Equinemius St. Brown might be a starter. So Sean, like, how do you kind of factor all these things into your projections for Fields, and where does he kind of land?
Yeah. So, I mean, any negatives you have with Justin Fields aren't his fault. It's the organization's fault. So, they lost Allen Robinson. So they brought in Byron Pringle and drafted Velus Jones. Like, they did a terrible job surrounding Fields with talent, and they still have arguably the worst offensive line, which is going to be brutal for Fields. But if anything, that's going to force him to run more. So the only reason you take him here is due to his rushing upside, and he's still, a talented passer. So he'll probably be able to make the most of what is a shitty situation. So I think that, QB 17, that's the range where it's okay to, bank on a guy's upside. And if he doesn't pan out, so be it. But, as a talent, I still love Fields, and, the Bear, shame on the Bears for giving him like zero help. But I think just given his rushing upside, that's going to be able to overcome a lot of the obstacles that he has, unfortunately, going into year 2.
Yeah, when I look at Fields, and to be clear, I would he's another guy just like Trey Lance. I would draft him well above ADP. JJ mentioned it probably should be about 3-4 spots higher. But here's why I like Justin Fields, and JJ, you kind of alluded to it. Week 9 at Pittsburgh, 17 of 29, 291 yards and a touchdown, 8 for 45 on the ground. He got hurt in the Baltimore game. Comes back week 14, 18 of 33. 224 yards, 2 scores against Green Bay with 74 on the ground. And then the last game he starts 26 of 39, 285 yards, 1 touchdown, and then another 35 on the ground. Those are his last 3 games where he finally got volume. In the first 5-6 starts that he made, he really wasn't. He had training wheels on. Like when he got normal volume, like a normal quarterback, it took a normal amount of dropbacks, which now that there's a new coaching staff, we can't say, we can't think that he won't. He was a productive, decent guy where at least he had a floor, even when he wasn't playing well or their team wasn't playing well. And I think the defense is going to be bad too. So I think he will get like a decent amount of dropbacks. And if he runs, even better. So yeah, I love me some Justin Fields this year. And then the third guy in this Konami co-rank, Deshaun Watson. JJ, will he play?
Man, up until about 3 weeks ago, I thought it was going to be a season long thing.
Yeah.
Pretty confidently too. But the NFL, you can't really use logic with these suspensions a lot of times, and you just, you don't understand it. But I think that with Watson, if you're looking to draft him, I do think that you have to give your situation some context, and you have to understand what's going on within your league and the kind of league that you're drafting in. If you're talking best ball, I would not be drafting Deshaun Watson with only one other quarterback. I'd only be getting him with a 3 quarterback build. And then when we're talking about a regular season long league, we have to remember that this is not like having a player or drafting a player at a discount like Alvin Kamara, where with him, there might be a suspension, there might not be a suspension. We don't fully know yet, but his position is just so valuable in fantasy football. And so with Kamara, you're getting him, let's say, if a 6-game suspension happens or something, and you get him in the 5th round or something like that, you're getting massive value when he's actually playing, and you get that replacement level player when he's not playing. But when it comes to Watson, that baseline replacement level player at quarterback is a lot higher, it's a lot better. And so the advantage that you're really getting with a player like Watson just isn't as strong as what you're going to get from a running back or a wide receiver. I mean, we saw it with Le'Veon Bell. He was seemingly suspended or something for 5 straight years in Pittsburgh. And, it just seemed like every year there was something going on, and people would hold on to him. And that opportunity cost in holding on to a player like that makes a lot more sense than holding on to a player like Watson. If Watson gets 8 games, let's say that he's out for about half the year, that's 8 games where you're holding him onto your bench, and there's a cost involved in that. There's a cost in holding that bench spot because you're not able to fill up that roster with guys off the waiver wire. So what I would say is it depends on how deep then your bench really is within your league. If you have a 4-team bench and you're using that with Deshaun Watson, who plays a position in fantasy football that really is not that big of a deal, and you can get a guy like Trey Lance, who realistically could produce fairly similar numbers in terms of fantasy production as a Deshaun Watson, who, by the way, didn't even play last year. I would much rather just go that route and have that spot on my bench. But I understand the upside, and I understand, from a tournament standpoint and such in a best ball format, having that for that big week 16, week 17, I totally understand that logic. But I think in a regular managed, typical home league that a lot of people play in, it's gonna be really tough for me to draft a guy like Watson when I know that quarterback is relatively replaceable. And you're gonna want to use that bench, especially during the front half of the season when so much crazy stuff is going on in your waiver wire.
Yeah, I agree. It's just hard because he doesn't even go into the IR slot. Like, a normal injured player, sometimes nowadays leagues are giving you these IR slots, especially once COVID hit. Like, a lot of leagues kind of changed it up, and like they'll give you one or even two sometimes slots where it's not really counting against your roster. But Watson would be suspended, so he's not injured. So that there's really no way to like productively stash him unless you have a ridiculous bench. But Sean, I'll ask you, over under 0.5 games suspended per count for Deshaun Watson.
What?
Per count. Per charge, like per count.
Can you just you're making me do math on the so
we get 12 or more games essentially.
12 more games?
12 or less.
Man, it's impossible to say, right? It sounds like it'll be under. But either way, this is a decision that you personally have to make based on your risk tolerance. I've been staying away. I am confident in my ability to construct my roster, to manage my team in season, to not really bank on Deshaun Watson only getting 4 games. It really is frustrating when it comes to, say, like an Amari Cooper. You still have to project him out. How many games will Deshaun Watson play has a huge impact on him. But in general, this is something that hopefully we get clarity on soon, and we don't have to be, wringing our brains around this. But as of right now, just based on everything you guys said, it's probably not worth the risk where, someone like Alvin Kamara probably is. So Deshaun Watson, I personally have not been drafting him at all. But based on the league, based on your risk tolerance, there are spots where I can, get behind it.
Yeah. Until we know concretely that he won't be suspended for the year, I don't think you want to touch him. Because even in best ball, I mean, like, you're either going to have to draft a third quarterback, which I personally don't think you should be doing, or you're going to already cut yourself off from half the season, even if he does play. So it's really tough to find a spot for him. But let's go to this next tier. I kind of call him the high upside pocket passer tier.
Great description. Very apt.
There's three guys in this tier, and each of them, you have reasons to like them. It's Derek Carr at QB 13. It's Kirk Cousins at QB 15, and then Tua Tagovailoa at QB 16. So I want to talk about each of these guys somewhat in depth. So JJ, let's start with Carr. I think, when I look at him, I think, like, can he be this year's Matthew Stafford, especially with Adams now? Until, like, there's usually one of those pocket passers that's completely unsexy, that goes outside the top 12 and kind of inches into like that 11, 10, 9 spot. Like, is that Carr this year?
I mean, it might be. This is one of those things that I, this is why I strive for the mobility at the quarterback position and the rushing at the quarterback position. Because you mentioned Matthew Stafford. I think if you were to pull someone like, or just a random sample of fantasy players, like casual fantasy managers, and you were to say, where did Matthew Stafford rank in points per game last year? Where did Joe Burrow rank in points per game last year? A lot of people would probably say, oh, they were top 5 quarterbacks in fantasy, but they weren't. They're low end QB1s, and that's generally the kind of ceiling that you will end up getting from these players, unless one of two things happens. You either get an absurd amount of volume across the entire season, which volume doesn't even necessarily drive things, nearly as much at the quarterback position as people think. But, if you do get an absurd season like we did last year with Tom Brady and volume, and he was efficient too, don't get me wrong, but if you get that kind of volume, it's going to be helpful. But then on top of that, it's really touchdown variance, right? It's really touchdown rate. And touchdown rate is a metric, it's just touchdowns divided by attempts. It's a metric that does tend to regress year over year, but better quarterbacks are going to be a little bit better in the touchdown rate statistic. Russell Wilson's been really, really efficient in touchdown rate throughout his career. We should expect that moving forward because he's a really good quarterback. But, if you get over like the 6% mark, the 6.5% mark, you can expect a little bit of regression there. And if you look at Derek Carr and his entire career, he's never really been that guy ever throughout his career. And so I do think there's at least some concern if Carr, I personally think that Carr has gone from being overrated, early in his career to then underrated. And it's been a really weird career trajectory for him from like a real NFL standpoint. And so maybe the market reflects that in some way with him in fantasy. But I really think that, sure, is he one of these, high upside pocket passers this year that I could see having a decent season and being a low end QB1 for sure? I mean, he's got Devontae Adams, he's got Darren Waller, he's got Hunter Renfrow, he's got a really good trio to throw to, and hopefully this offensive system can help him. But is he like the guy within this group that I'm absolutely targeting? I just don't think it's necessary, because really what this comes down to with a lot of these pocket passers is that touchdown variance.
John, where are you on Carr?
Yeah, I think similar of him. He's coming off a career high 4,800 passing yards last year. I think we're going to see some regression there. I'm projecting him closer to 4,500. But when it comes to passing touchdowns, that's where I think Davante Adams will help him out. I mean, he hasn't topped 30 passing touchdowns since 2015. But I have him right there this year because I think, when you look at he's still going to have Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller. They're good in the red zone, but he really hasn't had that other option. Last season, he had 12 end zone targets to Bryan Edwards and Zay Jones, and they caught one of those for a touchdown. So, I mean, having Davante Adams is going to add a handful of touchdowns, I think, over Bryan Edwards and Zay Jones. And it's just going to be hard for defenses to cover all three guys when they're healthy. So that's why I thought your description of him as a high ceiling pocket passer is pretty apt this year, because normally you would draft Carr just because he has a pretty high floor. But I just think with Adams there, I'm not saying he's going to have a 40 touchdown season, but I think, it's 50-50 odds he'll crack 30. So I think he does have that upside with those yards he's going to have a ton of yards again this year, where he definitely could sneak into that QB1 tier this year.
Yeah, I'm comfortable, because I always try to look at, JJ, you mentioned at the top something I thought was really important about how, there's really not a big spread between all these guys in terms of their scoring. So what I like to do is look at certain players at their ADPs and say, how can I replicate this production later? And maybe it's not Brady, because Brady's just, he's in a class of his own. But when I look at a guy like Matthew Stafford going at QB 11, I'm like, I can wait a few more. I'm fine just completely passing on him, getting 0 Matthew Stafford this year. And if I got Derek Carr every single time instead, I wouldn't mind that at all. So that's kind of where I am on Carr. I love him in best ball because I do think, you can kind of stack him with those receivers. It's not cheap, but if there's any quarterback that's going to kind of have a great season because of his receivers and because of that bump, it is Derek Carr. So that's kind of the way I'm approaching him. But there's another quarterback that the second guy I mentioned, Kirk Cousins, JJ. I mean, he was already kind of balling these Justin Jefferson, it's crazy, right? You get Justin Jefferson, all of a sudden you're throwing 68 touchdowns and 20 picks over the last 2 years. And now you get Kevin O'Connell, coming over. So offensive-minded coach finally after the Zimmer era. Maybe he actually likes Kirk Cousins this time. Maybe Kirk Cousins will finally have a coach that likes him. But I'm intrigued. I will say this. I'm intrigued by Cousins, with O'Connell, with Jefferson. Thielen's still out here catching touchdowns. Irv Smith should be back. You still got Dalvin Cook. KJ Osborne was a good number 3 as well. So I like Cousins, but what do you think of Kirk heading into this year?
Yeah, look, I mean, you mentioned the arbitrage with Derek Carr to Stafford. I feel the same way about Cousins. If you want to even wait a little bit more, I mean, it's not like it's that dramatic, but it's like they're in this same grouping. And so I prefer Cousins at ADP over Carr at ADP, right? I think they're in the same tierish, if you were to look at it from that perspective. But yeah, I mean, look, we generally need semi-outlier seasons from these pocket quarterbacks for them to be really valuable in fantasy football. We need touchdowns. We need higher touchdown rates. And you're getting the coordinator from LA that, as I mentioned earlier, Matthew Stafford last year had one of the highest pass rates at the goal line. And that really drove that 80% pass to rush touchdown rate that the Rams had. And so really what you're looking at this and you're saying, okay, Minnesota, what if they pass a little bit more? What if they're a little bit more aggressive at the goal line through the air? Then all of a sudden you can see Kirk Cousins being essentially this year's Matthew Stafford. And don't downplay Justin Jefferson at all either, because the last 2 years, as you alluded to, Raybon, the last 2 years, Kirk Cousins has been a low-end QB1 in points per game with Justin Jefferson in the mix. So, I mean, we've seen this before from Cousins. I think that, I don't generally draft guys this late in the double-digit rounds just for them to meet expectation or just gain a little bit of value, because you're not necessarily going to win your fantasy leagues that way. But from a best ball standpoint, that's okay to have Kirk Cousins, especially as your QB2, where we know that he can have these spiked weeks. If you're looking at it from a tournament perspective, he gets a favorable week 17 matchup that could be high scoring. And so I just think Cousins is in a really, really good spot this year to at least exceed ADP. I don't know if he's going to be QB7 but maybe he gets into like that QB9 range. Maybe he can get there. And I feel similarly about Derek Carr. And so if I'm looking at the two of them and Cousins is a little bit cheaper, I'm just going to prefer Cousins over a guy like Carr.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. It's like Carr is the Stafford, Cousins is the Carr. It's like at some point you probably have to take a quarterback. But Sean, what do you think of Cousins? I mean, he's everything around him looks pretty good.
Yeah, no, I think that the scheme change is going to help. Should be more up-tempo, pass-heavy offense. He's still linked up with arguably the best receiver in football right now, Justin Jefferson. Adam Thielen should still be a reliable red zone target, and he gets my boy Irv Smith back this year. I think that's going to be huge. I still love Irv Smith's upside. And it sounds like they're trying to get Dalvin Cook more involved in the passing game. So what's not to like about Cousins? I will say, though, when it comes to like Derek Carr and Kirk Cousins, I think of them as like two QB leagues, super flex league specialists. I mean, they provide a super high floor. You can project them for all 17 games because they're pocket passers, not running around getting hit, like they're way more likely to stay healthy all 17 games. And they do provide sneaky upside this year. So I think these two guys, like I love them in 2 QB and super flex leagues. I think they're super valuable for that. And then, like I said, like best ball, I love Viking stacking with Kirk Cousins. If you get Justin Jefferson, Thielen, Irv Smith, like I love Viking stacks because of this new scheme.
So here's the toughest one, because like Tua, man, like I love Tyreek. That's been one of my favorite players since he entered the league. He's gonna change everything about that Miami offense just because he's got so much grab. He's like Steph Curry, like he just changes the way that the entire passing game will be defended. But with that being said, just from a purely statistical standpoint, there's not a lot to like about what Tua has done thus far in the National Football League. Just 6.6 yards per attempt over 600 and close to 680 attempts in the league thus far. 27 touchdowns, 15 picks. Touchdown rate of 4%. Nothing really jumps out. QBR has been under 50. So JJ, I mean, you mentioned, you could go from Stafford to Carr, you could go from Carr to Cousins if you can't get a mobile guy. But do you feel the same way about Tua because of Tyreek, or are you a little bit more down on him?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that the bear case for him, you kind of laid out. I mean, like we don't know if he's really it yet, whereas we have a better sample. We have a better idea of how good, Derek Carr and Kirk Cousins can be. But if you want to look at the bullish case with Tua, part of the reason that his numbers have been so bad is that it's not really his deep ball ability. It's his deep ball tendency. He's just not throwing it deep at a high rate whatsoever. Over the last 2 years, the average across the NFL in 15 plus air yard throws has been about 17%. So quarterbacks are throwing 17% of their passes, 15 or more air yards. Tua 2 years ago as a rookie was at 14.8%. Last year was at 13%. So he was just dinking and dunking. That's why Jalen Waddle was able to do what he did last year as well. With in terms of his reception total. But it's the same deal too if you want to look at 20 plus air yards. But regardless of how you look at it, his completion percentage on those throws has actually been pretty strong. He's been better than like a Derek Carr. He's been better than a Tom Brady in completion percentage on them. Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes, Russell Wilson. And so I'm not saying he's a better deep ball passer than them. Obviously, if he's not taking those shots as frequently, and a lot of those guys are taking more risks, then chances are their completion percentage is likely dropping a little bit. But at the same time, it's at least interesting that he's shown that he might be able to throw it deep. But then the other thing too is, I don't know if we actually see the aggression that, I'm talking about here and that we're alluding to within this Mike McDaniel offense, because Mike McDaniel's coming from that Kyle Shanahan tree. And in that San Francisco offense, like I talked about earlier, they just like to get their playmakers in space, which is why I think they wanted a player like Tyreek Hill, because Tyreek Hill isn't just a deep threat like people think. I mean, he's very good at he can play running back realistically. And so, he can catch passes close to the line of scrimmage, as Jalen Waddle did last year, create a lot of yards after the catch. And that might not really do it, from a fantasy perspective and to increase these numbers for Tua. And so I do think that there's at least that concern where, in fantasy, I've seen a lot of people talk about how like the market generally can dictate if multiple wide receivers and a tight end are being drafted in the top 12 and the top 24, whatever, then that quarterback generally does well. Like Alex Smith back when he was in Kansas City, he would have like Tyreek getting drafted early and Travis Kelce being drafted early. So Alex Smith is bound to do well in fantasy. And we generally do see that within the market. The market is telling us that Tua, should be like a fringe top 12 quarterback. But I do think that we should still be at least a little bit concerned that this offense is really going to sort of fit what Tua has done and done well the first couple of years in the league, which is be an accurate passer and not really throw the ball down the field that much. And what that does is the pass catchers on the team can still be fine in like a half PPR or a full PPR format because they're getting so many looks just overall. They're just not getting those chunk plays. And so that's where the concern, I think, is and lies with Tua right now. I would still prefer a Carr or a Cousins over him, but I at least understand the allure, because if they do air it out a little bit and throw the ball down the field, I think that Tua, if he does get aggressive, I think that he might be okay.
Yeah, it's like you wonder how much of that was a function of just they didn't have that guy, like they have Tyreek Hill, but there is a certain stickiness even to that like deep pass attempt tendency. Like, certain guys that like to get the ball out and throw underneath tend to continue to do that. But he should be more efficient. Like he shouldn't average 6.6 yards per attempt. Yeah. Like he should get to at least 7 this year. Sean, do you kind of agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, I think, there were a lot of reasons why they didn't allow him to throw the ball downfield. One of them was the offensive line was terrible. You could tell just the way they would game plan was around the offensive line being terrible. And, they brought in Will Fuller, the deep threat specialist, to sit on the IR all season. So that didn't really help Tua out. So I think, it's almost the opposite of Justin Fields, where I feel like the Dolphins did everything possible to help Tua out entering year 3. They even revamped the offensive line. They brought in Tron Armstead, Connor Williams. So I think he will have more time to throw the ball downfield. And honestly, you don't have to with Tyreek Hill. Just giving Tyreek Hill a slant 5 yards out, he can take it to the house. Same thing with Jalen Waddle. Like both of those guys on the field at the same time is scary. So I love Tua's upside in this range. He's far thing from a slam dunk, compared to like a Carr Cousins. But I just love what the Dolphins did to surround him. And, the bring over the 49ers scheme that we're talking about is so good when it comes to Trey Lance. So it's up to Tua this year. It's a make or break year for him, but they really set the table up for him in year 3.
Yeah. He's going at QB 16. I think like I'm kind of neutral on him, only because you could get Justin Fields right now at QB 17. So that's, and that's kind of the thing with all these guys, which is why we're just trying to differentiate them. But of the 3, Tua, I think I'm still the lowest on him. I'm still the most questions, of those 3 guys that you could take that aren't going to really be running too much. But let's jump into this next one. And this one, we don't have to go through each guy too in depth, but JJ, I call this tier like the young guns. You have Trevor Lawrence entering year 2. You got Mac Jones entering year 2, and you got Zach Wilson entering year 2 as well. QB 18 is Lawrence. Mac Jones is at QB 20, and then Zach is at 24. Out of those 3, if you just had to draft one, which one would it be?
I would go with Trevor Lawrence. Of the 3, every ounce of research that I've done says that how a player does during his rookie season is pretty predictive of how he's going to be throughout the rest of his career. But I do think that with Lawrence, who was an unbelievable prospect, we know that he fell into objectively one of the worst situations imaginable in year 1, not only from like a personnel standpoint, but obviously a coaching standpoint. And so, his touchdown rate was obscenely low last year. That's something that's absolutely going to regress. He's going to throw more touchdowns this year. I would lock that in. It's almost impossible to not throw as many touchdowns as he did, or throw as few touchdowns as he did last season. And of these 3 guys, I think Trevor Lawrence brings the most rushing juice. He was a super athletic guy in college. He ran the ball a decent bit in college. He showed that off a little bit last year. He had 73 rushes, 334 yards on the ground. I don't see that ever happening with Mac Jones. Maybe Zach Wilson can show that off a little bit, but we're seeing more change from an environment standpoint. I know that the Jets obviously added some weapons for Zach Wilson, and I'm not saying that Zach Wilson's going to bust or anything. I'm just saying from an organizational change and a scheme change, etc. It's completely different for Trevor Lawrence this year. He has a coach now that has helped quarterbacks be more efficient and be better, not only in real football, but in fantasy football as well. We joke about the contracts they gave out to some of their weapons. And I don't, I'm not saying that like the Christian Kirk deal was a great deal, but Christian Kirk, he performed fairly well last year. I don't know how they're going to line him up because he did a lot of his work from the slot, and then they go and get Evan Ingram, who's going to also operate in that area of the field. But Travis Etienne's healthy. Marvin Jones is still good. The weapons are there. It's a way better situation for Trevor Lawrence. And again, of these three, I think that he's just going to bring objectively the most rushing juice too.
John, same question. Lawrence, Jones, or Wilson?
I think of these three, I got to go with Zach Wilson. I just think he offers the most value at ADP since he's going later than, the other two, but he has the best pass catching talent surrounding him out of the three as well. He's got Elijah Moore. I'm high on Elijah Moore entering year two. Garrett Wilson, he was my top receiver from this class. And Corey Davis isn't a bad number 3 receiver to have. Even Braxton Berrios is pretty sneaky at number 4 wide receiver. And, they added 2 decent tight ends, I would call them, and CJ Uzoma and Tyler Conklin. And I think the scheme itself seemed to be pretty fancy friendly last year. Mike White and Josh Johnson both had 300+ yard games. Joe Flacco threw for over 290 in his start. So I think the scheme should set up well for Wilson. I was a bit disappointed to not see him use his legs as much. I think we could see that in year 2. We've talked about Raybon, but he didn't have a 20+ yard rushing game since week 14. And then once that happened, he had 3 in the final 5 games. So I think we will see him sort of untap his rushing upside, hopefully, this season. So I just think out of the 3, he offers the most upside and value where he's going at QB 24.
Yeah, I tend to agree. The 6 spot difference between Lawrence and Wilson kind of does it for me because I do think Wilson has better weapons than Lawrence in New York now I think the line is actually will be pretty decent too. And I thought Wilson played better down the stretch last year. Lawrence, it's another new system. So there's just things that I think with the prices factored in, I do think it makes sense to kind of take that gamble on Wilson. I will say this though. I think Mac Jones is actually going to have the best real life season. Of those 3 guys. Right. But he's just not. Yeah. It's just not like he's probably gonna be like super efficient. Like Mac Jones could be what we want Tua to be. Like he could put up, that's like his ceiling, but that's the point. That's his ceiling. It's like he's not really gonna run the ball. I don't think he's gonna throw an exorbitant amount of touchdowns to really get into like that Cousins upside range or anything like that. But I do think he'll have a very efficient season just with no real rushing production. All right, let's do, and then so this final tier of 3 is the tier that I like to call the OGs. They've been here for a while. They're not just young guns anymore. Matt Ryan's at QB 21. You got Jameis at QB 22 and Ryan Tannehill at QB 23. So same question, JJ. You got to pick one. Who's it gonna be?
Yeah, I mean, like I think that each of these guys have intriguing, more so Matt Ryan and Tannehill have intriguing stacks, in best ball form. I guess Jameis does too, because I really like Chris Olave. But I think that they're all like viable in best ball formats as a QB2, just depending on who that QB1 is. But I think of these guys, I think Ryan Tannehill is probably the most intriguing at cost. The common theme throughout this show has been the mobility aspect of these quarterbacks. Last year we saw Ryan Tannehill's touchdown rate drop dramatically. But he still, he sort of has that Josh Allen in him where you just sort of assume regression's going to hit with these rushing touchdowns, and he just keeps piling them on. He had 4 rushing touchdowns, 7 rushing touchdowns, and 7 rushing touchdowns over the last 3 seasons. Over the last 3 years also, he was QB 15, 10, and 9 in points per game. Now, I will say situationally and looking at his environment, I don't love it. You have to be buying into, or at least hope that Robert Woods can, be 100%, look 100% close to the start of the year. You have to hope that Treylon Burks lives up to expectation. They don't have that much outside of that. I am a Kyle Phillips stan. I got to throw that out there.
That's my dude. He's going to be the slot receiver, right? Like, he's
100%. 100%.
It's going to, here's what's going to happen. It's going to be Robert Woods. It's going to be Westbrook Akina. It's going to be Kyle Phillips in the slot. And then everyone's just going to be like, damn, I drafted Treylon Burks. But no, sorry.
No. So, I mean, look, you're this late in the draft. I think that you should be throwing darts for upside. And if things break the right way, the offensive line is also pretty bad in Tennessee at this point. And so if things break the right way for some of these pass catchers in Tennessee, like if Treylon Burks is legit, if Robert Woods is healthy, if Kyle Phillips does what I expect him to do in the slot, then all of a sudden, the weapons aren't horrible. And Tannehill does have the mobility. And if this offensive line is bad, he might escape the pocket a little bit more. So I do think that Tannehill is probably the best option of these three. Not that I'm like, jumping for joy to get any of these three quarterbacks.
Sean, same question. You got Matty Ice, you got famous Jameis, and you got Tanny.
Man, yuck. I have to take one though, right? I mean, this is
got to.
When you're drafting these guys, something went wrong. Maybe you were pretty aggressive at running back, tight end, receiver, and you're begrudgingly taking one of these guys. I'm gonna have to go with Jameis Winston. I just think he offers the most upside in this range. And, weeks 1 through 7 last year, he did look pretty good. He ranked 17th in points per game. And considering he probably had the worst pass catching talent around him during that stretch last year. And now he gets potentially, Michael Thomas for week 1, Jarvis Landry and Chris Olave. So I do love the upgrade in talent around him. So the one concern I would have with Winston is we probably won't see as much rushing upside coming off the ACL tear. So maybe that does cap his upside a bit, but I still think he has, high-end QB2 sort of potential in this offense if things go according to plan. So I think out of these three, I don't love any of them, but you're forcing me to pick, so I'm going to go Jameis Winston.
Yeah, I'm going with Jameis as well. I think that I look at his top 3 receivers and Michael Thomas, we still don't really know exactly what's going on with him, but like at some point you would think in this season, for a good chunk of it, you would still expect him to have Michael Thomas, Chris Olave, who I love him too, JJ, and Jarvis Landry. So I just think, and then Alvin Kamara probably is still back at some point, even if he gets a suspension. So I just like the weapons around him. I still think the O-line is average. I don't love Sean Payton, just up and leaving, but
yeah.
We've seen Pete Carmichael run, coordinate that offense before, and the year Sean Payton was out, and then they threw a ton in that year. I mean, they had Drew Brees, but I think there was a lot of reasons to kind of be optimistic about Jameis, even when they were hiding him last year. I mean, career high 8.7% touchdown rate, career low 1.9% interception rate. Now, granted, that was on a small sample of 161 attempts, but everything was positive in terms of, the statistics and what he was able to do efficiency wise. And that's all we're really looking for. I think Matt Ryan is a good signing for the Colts, like probably the best they could have done for what they want to do. But I don't think it's going to translate to a ton of fantasy production. Mm-hmm. And then Tannehill, like the receivers are thin, as we kind of talked about. It's going to be the Derrick Henry show. But Winston is like, if there's just some luck where they say, okay, we need to throw for whatever reason, like they could do it out there. They could air it out if they want to. And Jameis has the arm to do it too. So I'm just looking for upside if I'm picking a quarterback in this range. So I think I'd go Jameis as well. And let's close it with this. The special, the guy outside the top 24 in ADP. We'll each choose a player, or it could be 2 if there's multiple guys. But JJ, like if you just had to take a Hail Mary dart throw on somebody that's outside that top 24, somebody that we didn't talk about, who would it be?
This one's easy for me. It's Daniel Jones. Yeah. Jones is actually I think I'm ranked at like QB 18 or something like that.
Guilty as well. Guilty.
Yeah. I mean, same. Here's the thing. When you build out projections, it's like hard for Daniel Jones to not look like at least better than ADP. Last season, he threw fewer than 1 passing touchdown per game, but he ran for 3 fewer rushing yards per game than Kyler Murray did. He had the same number of points per game as Derek Carr last year, Daniel Jones did. And look, I'm not someone who just like looks at previous season numbers and that's how things go. But I do think that it at least gives you some context that we probably just as a marketer are undervaluing Jones, just given that he's produced decently well on the ground. Historically, you get this Dable upgrade, which is huge. You get better weapons there. Hopefully Kadarius Toney is healthy. Wan'Dale Robinson can play the slot. Kenny Galladay hopefully is healthy. Saquon Barkley's back. The offensive line looks a lot better. There's just a lot to like. And the other thing too, what we saw with Dable, and I'm certainly not projecting this to happen, but Josh Allen in Buffalo, right? I'm not saying that Dimes is going to be Josh Allen, but what we saw from Josh Allen from a fantasy perspective that we loved is just this like, don't care about my body attitude, just kind of go crazy on a football field. And Dable encouraged it. And we've already seen blurbs and quotes from him encouraging Daniel Jones to do the same thing. And Daniel Jones has not the same Josh Allen skill set, but Josh Allen didn't like test well athletically. Like he wasn't this like freak athlete. He's just really good, running the football on the football field. And we see sort of those like same things and same traits with Daniel Jones. So I think that Jones, of anyone going after like the QB 20 or so, has the best shot. And this is crazy to say, but has the best shot to finish as a QB1 in fantasy this year, like a lower end QB1, just given the environment that he's in now, the upgrades everywhere, the fact that he runs the football. It's the best recipe for like a late round gem.
Yeah, I mean, Sean and I have kind of been on the same boat ever since we started doing our projections. It's like you said, it's like when you do projections, you're like, oh wait, he's running this much. Like, and his touchdowns, you have to project him to regress like a little bit toward, positively through the air. And he threw those 24 touchdowns in his rookie year. Remember, he had a couple of like I think he had 3 games with 4+ touchdowns. Yep. So it's not like he can't do it. Like, it's not like he's just this guy that's broken. It's just been a tough situation. But Sean, I'm guessing that's where you're going as well.
Yeah. So when it comes to just pure upside, you got to go Jones. I was sort of embarrassed and ashamed ranking him QB 18. So I'm glad I'm not alone. But I think the Brian Dable addition, being in his scheme can only help. And Raybon, you mentioned that some people kind of think that Jones won't start every game, even if healthy. I'm projecting him to start, 16 games this season. I'm not too worried about Tyrod Taylor. If anything, Tyrod gives him a boost. Just, look at Baker Mayfield, Justin Herbert, and Davis Mills the past few seasons. So Tyrod there doesn't scare me at all. I think Jones will be the quarterback all season. So I don't even think he has that low of a floor. So if you're going for upside, gotta go with Jones. I think in 2 QB super flex formats, I love Jared Goff.
Yeah.
In this range. I mean, he just
yes.
I can't believe I'm shilling for Daniel Jones and Jared Goff, but here we are. But I love Goff as well. I mean, he's surrounded by weapons. He's going to start all 17 games, barring injury. And again, he's a pocket passer. I don't think he's going to take that many hits. So I know you're the same way with me, but even in best ball, I love stacking Goff with, like a Amon-Ra St. Brown, TJ Hawkinson. They also brought in DJ Chark and Jameis Williams in case Jared Goff wants to throw the ball downfield. So I just love the talent around Goff this year.
I literally had Daniel Jones and Jared Goff.
Right, I know. Sorry about that.
No.
Like, I'll let y'all shine. Like, this is perfect because these are, somewhat contrarian takes that I think are going to help people. And the fact that, like, I guess JJ, because we don't even need to talk about Daniel Jones anymore. The thing I'll just say is like, of the quarterbacks that played half a season last year, he was 18th in points per game, and he's going QB 28. So, like, just even if he has that same season, which he should be much better, he's still a screaming value. So we don't even need to talk about him anymore. But I do want to get your quick thoughts on Jared Goff, because I've kind of felt like I was on a little bit of an island. I feel like the Lions offense is actually going to be quite decent this year, especially because I think their defense is going to be bad. So for fantasy, like, I think there's going to be volume. I think there's going to be comeback opportunities. And then you have, like, the PUP list is only 4 games now. So, like, even if Jameson Williams starts this year on it, he could be back earlier than, previously thought. Like, I just like what's going on in Detroit, and the line is great. So, like, am I crazy? I just think Jared Goff could be like, instead of like, we're talking about like Matt Jones and Trevor Lawrence and Matt Ryan, and like Jared Goff could end up being like that QB 18 or 19, like that unsexy pocket passer. But I could be bugging. So talk to me, Jared Goff, real quick.
No, I think that you're right. Like of the guys that are going later, I've definitely gotten a lot of Goff. The other thing to keep in mind is like the first 11 games of last year, that offense was operating, the passing offense was operating through a tight end and a running back, right?
Mm-hmm.
And everyone makes a big deal out about how Amon-Ra St. Brown only did what he did because TJ Hawkinson was sidelined and DeAndre Swift was sidelined. You don't do what Amon-Ra St. Brown did without being talented and good at football. And not only that, why are we giving TJ Hawkinson the benefit of the doubt and not Amon-Ra St. Brown, an actual wide receiver, DeAndre Swift, right? Like, it makes a lot more sense to want to run your offense through a really good slot player. And then you add in Jameson Williams, who complements Amon-Ra St. Brown perfectly. I mean, you can say DJ Chark does too, but I don't think DJ Chark is that great. But yeah, I mean, the weapons are there, man. I mean, the weapons are there and set up well for Goff to have, good. I think what we've basically done is found our arbitrage plays for every single player we talked about. So now you can just draft Daniel Jones and Jared Goff and you're good to go.
Yeah, like we like Trey Lance, but then we were like, we could get Justin Fields. So forget Trey Lance. But then we were like, maybe Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins. So, maybe forget those guys. But then we just ended up settling on Goff and Daniel Jones. So that's where we are. It's like you didn't even arrive quarterback. Like they didn't even bother to show up. That's the quarterbacks we're at. Forget late. But no, this was a great episode. JJ, I really appreciate you coming on and doing this. I thought you brought just as always a very sharp take to just how to approach what I think is a really important position that a lot of people still get wrong. So really appreciate it. If they don't already know, which they probably do, but tell everybody what you're up to, where they can find you, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Late Round QB. I'm selling a draft guide right now. It's more strategy focused. It's not really like player profile focused and such. That's over on lateround.com. So check it out in the Late Round podcast.
And I got to say, JJ, I love the draft guide. I was reading it and I was like usually somebody gives you a draft guide and you're reading it and you're like, well, now I got to read 200 player profiles. So I love the format. Like, people go check out JJ's draft guide. It's that crack. It's that crack. So
I appreciate it.
And again, thank you for doing this. You can find Sean on Twitter at @the_oddsmaker. You can find me at Chris Raybon, and you can find us both at those same handles in the free award-winning Action Network app. Be sure to check out actionnetwork.com for all fantasy content, as well as our projections and rankings. And we'll be back until next episode. Let's get this money.